Good afternoon. This is Brian Gerrish with a special edition of UK Column Live, and I'm going to be joined this afternoon by an ex-Royal Marine, Stuart Dodd, who has got an incredible story to tell. He's being harassed by British police. And how did he end up in this position? Well, it started once again with a dispute in the family courts. This story is quite remarkable with the vehemence with which the police are pursuing this man at the moment. And Stuart's ultimately come to us to get the truth out about what's happening to him. And of course, as always, aside from helping Stuart himself, we hope that by broadcasting what's happening, we can start to help other people in similar positions. So, Stuart, have we got you there? We had a good connection just now.
Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, well, welcome into UK Column Live. You are overseas. I know that you won't want to give me an exact location, but can you tell me anything about where you are? Distant, close, whatever?
Quite a long way away, so the other side of the world, basically, at the moment.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm gonna give you a free start here because you chatted to us the other day. You gave us a very concise summary. We've now decided to do it formally, as it were. So over to you. Tell us your story. We're beginning, obviously. When was life normal? When did things change?
Yeah. So really, my case started in April 2013 when my now ex-wife and I separated. Essentially, life was very normal. I had two young sons. Approximate ages now are almost 3 and almost 5. Essentially, pretty unknown, normal matrimonial situation. We separated on the 7th of April. I came home from a Commonwealth Games selection shoot to basically find my wife had gone with my children. She left a note saying, she wouldn't use them as a weapon. She wouldn't stop me seeing them. She called and texted me and invited me to meet with her to see the children and discuss future contact. And really, that's where my life sort of changed from normality to the current situation, which is pretty unexplainable. And essentially, she invited me over there. As I proceeded over, I picked up one of the children's godparents to come as independent. And I was stopped by 3 armed response vehicles at gunpoint, where it transpires after having got hold of my freedom of information through a subject access request, the call logs from the police. Before she contacted me and invited me over, she'd called the police, used my former elite military skills and career as a risk, said that I'd threatened to kill, kidnap, harm, was psychologically unstable, etc. That really sort of transitioned from normal married life to, what is quite an extreme case within children's courts now. Since that day, on that day, the police realised that something didn't quite add up, but still sort of, used firearms officers to escort me to the premises to see my children, my ex-wife, who made a number of claims, and the police threatened me. There's basically been a conscious campaign to create a narrative of false allegations to deny contact. So my wife really stopped me seeing the children day one, started the allegations day one, and I've really been sort of trying to correct the narrative since then through the family courts. Unfortunately, the family courts, working on a balance of probability as opposed to the criminal threshold of beyond reasonable doubt, have made a number of findings. They've refused me evidence, they've refused me witnesses. So I think in total I've had around 75 court hearings over the last 2 years. I've had God knows how many within the family court, probably 50 of those, 60 of those. I've still not had a single witness, any evidence. I've self-represented for almost 2 years now. All the criminal allegations my ex-wife has made, so the allegation narrative kind of stands at mental, physical, emotional, financial cruelty, domestic violence, 3 cases of harassment non-violent by telephone call, intimidation of a witness, conspiracy to abduct, conspiracy to kidnap, conspiracy to murder, fraud, Section 5 public order offence, and a couple of others in there somewhere. Only one's made it to trial. The rest have been dismissed as no case to answer. The one that made it to trial, and It's worth noting I've been on police bail or court bail now since April, early mid-April 2013, without break. The harassment and violent by telephone call made it to trial on the 7th of July last year, and was dismissed during her evidence as no case to answer. She was cautioned for the consequences of lying under oath 11 times. And, you know, there's just no evidence to any of it. It's total rubbish. And in that trial, she made claims, for example, that I threatened to kill her, kidnap her, hurt the children, etc. And all the telephone calls were recorded, and we went through those one at a time. Unfortunately, that trial transcript, those recordings, the call recordings, all CPS evidence. Families Court have refused to be allowed into the family court, amongst everything else, and made the totally polar opposite findings. So I'm in a position now where, despite all criminal charges that are currently under investigation having been dismissed, despite her lying, the family court made those findings, and they made a no contact order on the 14th of January this year. So I'm kind of in a position where there's lots of lies going on within the family court. There seems to be no redressing it. The family courts now seem to perceive me as, you know, some sort of extreme risk of emotional harm to the children. And there's no way to correct that narrative at all. The judge concerned, so I've had 19 judges in my family case, and I requested it be reserved to one for continuity of judicial oversight. That finally ended up with a district judge, Nadeem Khan, who has essentially done nothing in my case. He's completely delayed it. He's denied me evidence. He's threatened me at every opportunity. Whenever you stand up to the court, he tends to go against you and preclude contact. He's been too afraid of implementing contact because mother's upset or mother doesn't want to support it. And on the 19th of February this year, he was arrested for treason, fraud under the 2006 Fraud Act, misconduct in a public office, and contempt of court. I'm aware through other parties, and I'm aware of one of your other guest speakers, Guy Taylor, who I've spoken with at length, who has also had dealings with Mr. Khan, and has also had him arrested on similar basis. That, you know, there's corrupt judges out there. They're either incompetent or corrupt. There's no evidence, no justification to preclude contact, and he's continued to do so. And as of this week, he's now trying to preclude my mother, so the paternal grandmother, contact with my children as well, based on the fact that as a first-hand witness to some of the allegations that she knows are false, that the family court made findings of, that, again, she fails to consider mother's emotional needs, and therefore is a risk of emotional harm to the children. So lots has gone on. I'm currently being investigated for harassment, and the police have informed me that there's a passport watch. They will arrest me on immediate return to the UK, most likely to remand me for a charge of harassment. I haven't had any contact with my ex except through court for over 2 years, and there can be no harassment. The police have had 3 warrants out now and raided various houses, friends, and my properties. They've taken all IT, mobile phones, etc. And specifically, they've taken the original copy of a void order. And I voided the orders of the family and divorce courts based on ultra vires and void ab initio, amongst a number of other things, and non-procedural compliance. And within 5 days of me actually filing that with the chief of police, with the court, with the nursery, and with the Kafkas Guardian, my houses have been raided, friends have been interviewed or questioned, another friend was arrested. Another friend of mine actually, of their own volition, knocked on my ex-wife's door to talk to her, to say, listen, come on, we're adults, why are you stopping him seeing your children? She refused to talk and simply closed the door. Fine. She was later arrested for harassment, intimidation, and conspiracy to abduct. Within that arrest, she was arrested actually in Warwickshire, and this whole matter has been based around West Mercia Police. The police officer, a PC 3202 Barradell Smith from West Mercia, drove to Warwickshire, interviewed her, made a number of false statements and allegations, and then when escorting her from the police station to her car, again attempted to intimidate, bully, and make false statements against me. The police in this matter throughout have been, they've certainly failed to investigate without fear nor favour, shall we say. They've been completely biased, discriminatory, And starting with the harassment, the first harassment allegation and non-violent by telephone call in July 13, I knew to being arrested. I provided evidence to the police because the telephone calls were agreed in writing between the parties' solicitors. My ex-wife denied that. I presented myself for interview voluntarily. I provided evidence to prove that the calls were agreed. They were of the right duration. I had the calls recorded. I provided that to the police. That police officer failed to forward those to the ERO. The ERO comments within Police National Computer by the October of that year stated, quote unquote, "I have read the evidence, I've heard all the calls, I've read the transcripts, there is no evidence of harassment here." And yet I remained on bail for another 9 months and went to trial, as discussed before. Of note, prior to that trial, the police tried to plea bargain me out for a 2 to 5 year restraining order not to see my wife or children. And it's total rubbish. They knew there was no case. And they have maliciously pursued me on that basis. It's also worth noting in November, on the 27th of November 2013, after a Children Act hearing that actually went in my favour, I was arrested for saying to my ex-wife's solicitor that she should be ashamed of herself. I was arrested in the car park with a friend for intimidation of a witness. I was then placed on remand for 17 days prior to Christmas that year, with no telephone calls. And my visitors were turned away despite all the relevant forms being submitted. That matter, I was later released after 5 judges' chambers hearings on court bail, police and court bail. I went back to the Crown Court in February, I think it was February the 3rd, and it was thrown out by the judge as totally unfounded, and CPS were cautioned about their abuse of powers. It was returned back to the magistrates as the original sort of summary offence, and obviously that then later went to trial. Despite the family court recommending and making orders for contact at that point, which they suspended for the allegation and the police bail conditions precluding contact, when bail conditions were changed and the Crown Court judge actually handwrote the order, stopped proceedings and sent me off to the court clerk to get my contact reinstated immediately. The court then refused to reinstate contact, even though notes on file, handwritten notes from the various judges, state to immediately reinstate contact when bail conditions changed or allegations are dropped. So I've kind of been in prison, I've been arrested an awful lot, I've been questioned an awful lot. I've had police officers emailing friends of mine who are totally unrelated to proceedings. They've sent them 2 pages of emails telling them about previous arrests, why they arrested me, that I got away on a technicality, what I'm being investigated for in future, and how I'm some sort of dicey, tricky character. So completely defaming me. I've had police officers phoning friends and threatening them if they attempt to see my children that they will be arrested for harassment, even though they've not been to see my children. Harassment is a code of conduct on 2 or more occasions. I've had police officers, the same as the last couple of examples I've cited, phoning ex-girlfriends, giving them relationship advice, telling them that I was in relationships with other people and living with them at the same time as being with them, to try and essentially create trouble, I assume, to, I don't know, try and get people to, I think in their eyes, stop protecting me. I've had police officers phoning those same parties, basically painting a picture that I'm some manipulative, coercively controlling individual. It's generally been disruptive and harassing me, turning up at my property. I've had pretty much everything. Within the family courts, I had a 3-day finding of fact in August 2014. The judge refused evidence. People making allegations refused to turn up to court as witnesses. I needed court witness summons. Those parties lied and there was clear proof, and the judge refused to consider or investigate perjury. I've had pretty much everything. I've requested full transcripts of court hearings. Orders have been made for it. Applications and payment to the transcription services have been made. Those reports have been provided and recorded within Family Man. And the court have lied, saying there were no hearings on those days. The digital recordings of the court hearings have been lost, and that there is no evidence of the hearing, and that anything I say basically is total rubbish. So we've now got proof of putting the course of justice by a district judge. You name it, I've pretty much had it in this case. I've had guardians lying, recommending no contact, based on absolutely no evidence whatsoever. Mothers say so, which can be proven as false. They've had proof and they refuse to accept it. I've had police officers making false referrals to social services about risk to my children, ex-partners and their children. Social services then wrote reports, did a 16-week investigation, and stated that the allegations were false. There was no evidence. There's no evidence of any of this. That, basically it was total rubbish. And those reports have been published. The courts have refused to accept them. And then 2 months later, those reports were miraculously withdrawn after a phone call from the Guardian saying that the social worker didn't actually know what they were doing. The police officer making those referrals within those reports also stated that there was no risk. So it's basically been a narrative and a campaign of harassment to discredit, to try and create risk where there is none. And an example of that would be my ex-wife has been on a high-risk domestic violence protection plan since October 2013. At that time, the only allegation in existence was this harassment non-violent by telephone call, specifically making 2 calls that lasted longer than the agreed period, and her claims that I threatened her during those calls, even though they're all recorded. And the police have installed security cameras, security lights, 3 or 4 visits a week. The children can't play outside. There's panic alarms, panic rooms fitted to her and her parents' houses. And those allegations were clearly dismissed as unfounded and she was lying, and yet they continue on that basis. There isn't any evidence of any risk. I've not spoken to my wife outside of the courts. And it's just a farce. It really is a farce. The courts and the judge continually refuse to obey the law themselves. And I've had quotes like, "It's my court, I'll do what I want." It really has been a joke, and it's been quite distressing. And it seems that the police now are pursuing a narrative to try and justify their actions and expenditure of resources over the last few years.
Stuart, you've absolutely been through the mill with what you're describing, and I'm going to say for some people who are watching, listening to you speak, they've never come across this sort of thing before. I can imagine there's some people saying, "Well, this is just incredible. This can't be right." I'm going to say I'm listening to you, and you're covering areas which we've heard many times before with many different cases. So the common theme through all of the people coming to us talking about problems in the family courts are exactly the points you've raised. They talk about social workers lying. They talk about falsified reports. They talk about perjury. I've been in a court myself where the judge calmly said, "Well, it's my court and I'll do what I like." I was in court myself when it was obvious that a social worker had committed perjury by trying to claim that I had tried to enter a contact centre in Wales. I have never been to that contact centre at any time. And on the day in question, when she claimed that I tried to force my way in, I had 6 witnesses to say that I was here at the UK column offices. Some people will be thinking, can this be true? I'm going to say, well, case after case, we're hearing that exactly these things are happening. And in the papers over the last 2 days, here there's a case where a social worker falsified a report. She got caught out, but all that's happened is that essentially she's had an administrative slap on the wrist, and she's going to be watched for the next 12 months to make sure she doesn't make any mistakes. Within what's happened, you seem to have a magnified case of everything happening. The other person who did come into my mind is another ex-Royal Marine called Mick Harby, who we've featured on UK column before, but he ran into a custody battle with his wife. Again, this same sort of thing, that he suddenly appeared to become a dangerous individual, but ultimately he was put in prison as a result of trying to give his children presents. And he ended up defending himself because it was apparent to him that the legal teams were simply doing deals behind his back. And he's one of the cases where we started to learn quite a lot about how the courts treated men. And one of the things that Mick Harvey discovered was that the court system is running training workshops where effectively magistrates in particular are being led into an automatic decision against the man. So the man presents a threat. All of the domestic violence is carried out by men. And Mick Harvey's point was that once these people have been through this type of training, they sit in a court, they're already prejudiced against you. But something I'd like to just do is, and obviously this is a very intensely personal matter, so if you don't want to answer anything, we're not going to be offended. But if we go back to the beginning, you had a dispute with your wife, but was there any circumstance in the background that caused both of you problems, or did it come out of nowhere and then suddenly your wife is saying, well, you're a risk?
So no, I'm happy to discuss and be totally transparent, to be honest, and it's exactly the same as I've been in the family court. So, we had the usual marital problems, and our situation was, we had a difficult birth with our first. We then had an extension during the latter stages of my wife's second pregnancy, to such a point that we lived in one room for 89 days until my second son was 1 month old. So there was a lot of stress, and things weren't right. The fundamental bottom line was, we weren't suited. But when we separated, there was never any risk of, there was no domestic violence history, there was nothing. And my wife's own testimony to the Crown magistrates and family courts concurs with that. She's provided testimony to say, I've never done anything, I'm a good father. I've only ever raised my voice to her once when I suggested that she needed to go and get some help because she was suffering. And that's it. So, even testimony on the first family hearing in June 13, she said, there was nothing. And simply her argument at that point was that I'd never cared for my children and I was incapable of caring for them because I was always so busy with work and other pursuits. And it seems that as time's gone on, the allegations have intensified and become more extreme, which is part of why, it's difficult to get the authorities to actually stand back and look at the overall narrative to understand, where any risk might be. I've written affidavits to the courts specifically to state I've never done anything, I've never raised my voice, or hurt, or no domestic violence, or harassed or intimidated, so that then under penalty of perjury they could pursue me if I'm lying. I'm not lying. There is nothing I've done to my ex-wife. And, unfortunately, as time goes on, as solicitors get involved, the allegations get intensified or just tweaked and it's subtly manipulated. And in my case, my ex-wife has made allegations pretty much against everybody. Myself, my mother, my father, my sister, the godparents, our NCT friends, everybody's had an allegation and it's all totally unfounded. She's completely isolated my sons from any contact with.
Good afternoon. This is Brian Gerrish with a special edition of UK Connection there. It's frozen up. If you're wondering why the picture of Stuart is so small, it's because he's talking to us through a normal handheld mobile phone. We did have a very good connection. Let's see whether we can get that back. While we're waiting for him, I'll just come up on this point so that on many occasions we have seen, particularly mothers, but it's also happened for fathers as well, a ramping up of the allegations against the other party. And we sense that what's actually happening is, we'll say the mother in this case is being coached, not only probably by her own legal team, but also by social service staff that come into contact with her. Stuart, I think we've got you back. Okay, that's good. While we'd lost you, I was just effectively speaking to our audience and saying that this business of very often the mother, but we have seen it in cases where it's working the other way round with the father. But basically, the mother starts to ramp up. So the story starts quite small and then it becomes more and more venomous against the other partner. And the conclusion that we've come to is that some sort of coaching goes on. Now, of course, the legal teams have got a reason for doing that, in that is the more antagonistic that they make the case and the longer it goes on, the more money they make. But we also have seen that social services are prepared to use this sort of perverse psychology in order to ramp up the antagonism. And in particular, we regularly see that the social services spread lies between different parts of the families in order to presumably cause angst and break them up. So there's some form of applied psychology going on. It's very vicious. We could say some people make money out of an extension of the family case, but it's clear in other cases that something else is at work. But am I right in saying that the first time you really tried to see your children, that was the occasion in which there was did you say it was an armed response unit? Just tell us about that first time you tried to get in touch with the children.
Yeah, so I mean, basically it was day one of separation. My wife invited me to go and see the children at her parents' address, and she did so in telephone call, text, and in writing. As I left the house, I picked up one of the children's godparents and was shortly stopped by two armed response vehicles across the road, one unmarked armed response vehicle that had followed me from my home, the 26 miles to my ex-wife's location. I was removed from the car at gunpoint. The car was searched for firearms because they were told that there was firearms. I was proceeding to go and hurt them. There were no guns in the car. And then I was, after about 40 minutes of talking the police down, showing them the text to say that I'd been invited. They informed me that that's not what they were told. They were told that I was proceeding there uninvited, had threatened her, etc. I was then escorted to the property by 4 armed officers. Whilst with my ex, I was supervised by armed officers at all times. I had a civil conversation with my ex. And then as I was leaving the property, bearing in mind there were 2 police officers armed no more than 2 meters away from us while we were talking in the garden. As she entered the house, I heard her scream. She made a claim that I'd threatened her in some way. A police officer came running out of the property and directly threatened me, stating that, he'll throw the book at me if I ever come into Herefordshire again, he'll have me, blah, blah, blah. At which point, I'm a slightly robust character. I told him where to go and place that, and that he had no evidence and that he was discriminating against me. I then peacefully left the property of my own volition, with a witness to all of this. And that really started it. And by 9 o'clock the next morning, which was a Monday, there'd been an unnotified non-molestation application made. The statement in support of that, the affidavit, is a work of fiction, you might say, and started these claims. It's worth noting that when I cross-examined my ex-wife on several occasions, but most recently the 13th and 14th of January, I asked her specifically if she'd ever made some of these allegations against me, which she denied. I then provided the Section 9 statements from the Crown Court and various other affidavits to prove that she was lying. The court refused to accept them. I then questioned her further and proved within the police call logs that she'd lied again. The judge refused to allow the evidence because it wasn't within the bundle, although it was, because I'd filed it with the court 9 months previous, and then accused me of tampering with the records and the police call logs. So yeah, they do, make stuff up. The police involvement from day one was very aggressive, and the police advised her, and it's on record the first day, to apply for a non-molestation order when there was no evidence and nothing going on. And for me, a simple application of common sense here would have been pretty useful. I imagine most separations are fairly emotional situations, and this one, there was no evidence, there was no outbursts, there was nothing other than her allegations behind the scenes where there wasn't a contact. Why they've taken the response they have. I am aware my ex-wife's father is very influential and very wealthy. It would be easy to try and come up with a conspiracy as to he's pulling strings or Freemason involvement, but basically the police are heavy-handed, they've been biased, they've discriminated. I think any individual that stands up to them and says, no, I don't accept that, I have rights, you have no evidence, go away, they then maliciously pursue you. I think that's probably as simple as the case is, but within the courts themselves, it's a joke. I've had one police officer who's the same police officer all the way through, who is the regional domestic violence officer, a PC 3202 Barrydale Smith. He's even written to family courts personally in response to correspondence, legally privileged correspondence I've sent to my ex-wife's solicitor. He's in those letters, he's tried to influence the judge. He's tried to explain comments within PNC from third-party officers. The level of involvement is incredible when you dig, and I think anybody out there who is meticulous or detailed in the analysis, you will get a response, I believe, that you won't like, because they don't like being questioned, and often they are wrong. And unfortunately, the system cannot say it is wrong or has made a mistake. Yeah. And an example of that would be, for me in the family court, I had a 3-day finding of fact in August 14. I requested the transcripts in order to go to appeal to say you can't possibly make a judgment against the testimony of the person. So, for example, my ex-wife in the Crown and in the family court testified that the calls within her statement were not harassing or intimidating. So she said they're not harassing or intimidating. Yet the judge makes judgment that they were. It's just not possible. Someone can't say something didn't happen and you make a finding. So I requested the transcripts. As I said before, they lost the discs. They denied there was an order. They denied there was a hearing. And when you get to an appeal court, they close ranks. And to say that I was slammed in that appeal would be an understatement. It was quite a funny day in the end, because when I got there, I found out that I was being observed by undercover police at all court hearings through my latest subject access request. I then got slammed in the appeal. I then, as I left the court, got a letter saying that I'd harassed and intimidated my ex-wife's mother for, if I recall correctly, an anonymous tip-off to DVLA that she'd been driving while suffering from epilepsy. Nothing to do with me, and I don't get what part of anonymous makes that me. To then get home to be met by further armed officers to arrest me and search my property for the illegal possession of 7 firearms. Novelty when I voluntarily surrendered my firearms license 16 months beforehand. So you kind of get to a point where you realise that they're closing ranks, they want to increase pressure on you, and they want to provoke a response from you. And the simple fact is, this is a case where it's about the welfare and rights of my 2 sons. That they have rights to have equitable contact with their father and paternal family, but one party simply doesn't want that to happen. They've made up a lot of lies. The police have reacted and responded to that. They've allocated a phenomenal amount of resources, and my barrister, or my lawyer in this instance, Ian Kelsey of Kelsey and Hall in Bristol, he hasn't seen this allocation of resources to anything other than very serious murder investigations. So they're responding quite heavy-handed, and they won't admit they've got it wrong, and they won't admit that actually this is just one party who really doesn't want the children to see, the father.
Stuart, what comes into my mind when you're talking about the police is, of course, the behaviour of the City of London police around the London plumber, Ian Puddick, where there was his wife was having a relationship with somebody in a big London company. He makes one telephone call to say, this is not right, please can you move my wife? And what follows is raids on his businesses and home, and unbelievable resources. It's estimated about £1 million worth of police anti-terrorist forces used to try and intimidate, and well, as they did, intimidate, frighten, harass him. Even the judge subsequently in court said he'd never seen such a level of fraud by the police. But we are seeing this now coming to the surface in a variety of locations. I've got to say, do you think it's because of your specific military background that these armed police have turned up? Could it be that?
You can only assume, yes, it is that. I think on the police computers, certain skill sets have flags. I think possession of firearms have flags. And I would assume the seriousness of the allegations that have been made would probably provoke that response. I mean, I spoke with an Inspector Peter Gebby, who was the first professional standards chap that I complained to, who was actually a really decent guy, ex-military. He didn't understand the level of response. He said if it was his, sort of constabulary at the time, or his sort of responsibility, there wouldn't have been that level of response, particularly with armed officers. Interestingly, this guy also put in PNC a comment to say to his fellow officers, and quote unquote, basically, please toe the line with respect to Mr. Dodd. Our conduct in this matter will come under intense internal and external scrutiny. Toe the line. He also told me in a 3.5-hour recorded session at my house where he turned up to just say, listen, you will get through this, just keep your nose clean and stay away from it. So, it's hard to say, the police do things their way.
Are you, Stuart, are you aware of the MAPA organisation? Have you come across that term before?
I haven't.
Well, MAPA stands for Multi-Agency Public Protection Arrangement. I think there's a total of 63 MAPA districts over the country. And this is a group of people who are brought together in order to keep an eye on anybody who's considered a threat, particularly to people in positions of power, so politicians or members of the establishment, also on some occasions celebrities. But meeting behind closed doors, you will have the police, social services, people from the local NHS, the local authority, local mental health teams. And once a name has been flagged up, they discuss the person, and then they decide what level of risk they present, and they also decide what, if anything, should be done. And I just wonder, apologies for that, my phone buzzing, I just wonder whether information about your case, and indeed other cases, is being passed by social services into the MAPA teams. And of course, in your case, this business about your former military background would mean that all sorts of flags are going up. But the MAPA teams exist. The general public has no idea of the names of the people that sit on their local MAPA boards. And the most important thing, of course, is the MAPA panel meets in secret behind closed doors and makes a decision which the target person is never aware of. So I'd just give that to you, because I would, if I was a betting man, which I'm not, but if I was going to have a bet on it, I bet that your local MAPA team got involved pretty quickly, and that would be one of the reasons why the police response was escalated. But if I can just move on a little bit, you obviously got to a point where you'd been through all the court hearings, and then you decided that you weren't going to go with a legal team, you were going to represent yourself. Can you tell us, why did you make that decision? How did you get to that point?
I think very early on, I mean, I think, well, so I was represented between April and October 2013, and I spent somewhere in the region of about £80,000 by that point alone. They were useless, to be honest. It was clear that there was some sort of agreement between the various parties and the court. My counsel would not stand up and just, draw a line definitively and say, no, that is not correct. Nobody would directly challenge the court or the law. And I was getting increasingly frustrated by the amount of mistruths being spread. So, for example, my ex's counsel would blatantly stand up and lie about things within hearings, knowing that it wasn't true, that there was no proof, and when confronted, would literally look sheepish, sit down and put their head between their legs. So I got to a point realising that they didn't really add any value, that I knew the details of my case far better than they did, because they'd often only prepare the day before. And I just thought, well, we're clearly in this for the long haul. I was clearly aware that there was an opportunity for them to make considerable amount of money out of individuals, and I decided I could do a better job myself. The obvious challenge to that is the fact that because you are emotionally connected to the case, it's very difficult sometimes to keep those emotions separate. and the courts certainly don't like any display of emotion or emotional language. And certainly I've used some choice language in the past with them, which I'm now led to believe isn't legal terminology. But yeah, it's pointless. Basically, they were absolutely useless. So I self-represented then in the family and criminal courts thereafter.
So you had. I'm sorry. So you had some success when you started to do that. Am I right in saying you've talked about a void order here? Did you force that yourself?
Yeah, so there's a number of. I've had various successes in getting family cases transferred to higher courts, challenging non-molestation orders, getting various criminal charges thrown out. The void order, after a conversation with Guy Taylor and a number of others, I did a significant amount of research into it, and I voided the order of the divorce and family courts. Haven't been back to court for it yet. I filed those notices, gave them the required period to respond by. And they simply try to ignore you. The courts genuinely just ignore you. If you don't conform, don't do what they say, they just try and basically whitewash you. I've had magistrates and crown courts brought to a halt by the whole sort of, kind of Freeman approach and, Stuart of the family Dodd as opposed to Stuart Dodd. They just don't like it. And as soon as you challenge them in any way, it's almost like they up the ante to punish you and make you subservient to the courts. And for me, that's part of the reason why I decided to represent myself. I have rights. I believe in my rights. I will not, I've defended my country on an ideology of truth and justice, and I believe in it strongly. And now knowing that it's totally false and corrupt, I won't stand for that. I won't stand to be bullied either. And clearly that's not being very well received.
Well, again, we've heard similar accounts of people trying to do things in court. However, there are cases where progress is being made, and I'm going to say UK Column's going to try and get more information out about those positive sides, but that's digressing slightly. So overall, you enter this world, which must have been a nightmare. It continues over years. You are being effectively harassed and threatened by a number of people, whether it's the police or in the courts. And then you've also said that friends received the rough treatment from the police as well. So when did you get to a point that you felt you needed to leave UK?
I think I got to a point when I'd filed a void order that I decided I needed a break anyway. And a friend of mine actually broke his back, and I'd sort of offered to go out and help care for him. And as I filed the void order, things just started to heat up. And it was at that point, and another friend of mine who knocked on my ex-wife's door to talk to her was arrested. And the level of the allegations for knocking on someone's door to be arrested for harassment, intimidation, and accused of conspiracy to abduct. The penny kind of drops, and you go, listen, these people are just going to make anything up because they've got one serious imagination. Time to get away from this. So for my own health reasons, and to avoid any possible accusation that I'm up to something, doing more, whatever it might be, I'm out of the way for the moment.
Right, but you clearly sense that you're being, I'll use the word loosely, watched, tracked, where you are. Do you really believe that the surveillance on you is that intense?
I'm unsure about sort of physical surveillance or otherwise. I think they've certainly used travel and finance type intelligence to locate where I am. So, for example, I didn't tell anybody where I was going or when I return, and the police clearly knew that information and reported it to a number of other parties, which would imply there is some sort of research going on or tracking of my location. I try to make decisions based on facts as they're presented or patterns of behaviour. It's certain that they are trying to locate me. It's certain they know where I am, even though I've told nobody. It's certain that they knew when my return date was. From that, they're pretty serious. And if, above all else, the latest investigation is only harassment for submitting civil legal correspondence, i.e. a void order, how on earth can you justify that level of resource allocation to such a minor complaint? It genuinely is crazy. None of it adds up, and every party involved who I provide full transparency of all the facts and paperwork to a number of parties. So I have a large group of friends who are barristers who've seen everything for 2 years and advised. It just doesn't make sense. It really doesn't. This is just crazy. It really is crazy, and it almost feels like a come on to try and provoke me, or to force me out the way, or to get me to go quiet, or to provoke me to do something, which I'm simply not going to do. Yeah. As I said earlier, this is about my sons. I'm not going to abandon them. They have rights, and it is in their interest to have a long-term relationship with their father and their mother, and the relevant families.
Well, Stuart, I'm sure every parent can understand what you're saying. It is an incredible story that you've taken us through. You've made this video with us to get a recording, essentially, of your testimony, the evidence as to what's happened to you. We had a little bit of a discussion. We felt that to make this public not only informs other people, but it also gives you a greater level of protection because you are known instead of being an unknown individual suffering all these problems. But what would you like to achieve? What would you like other people to do as a result of hearing what you've had to say?
I think there's a couple of things, really. I think, firstly, for anybody going through these sorts of situations, there's some lessons to learn about the family courts and what to expect. And it's very much around, whatever you do, try and keep it civil, try and keep it out of courts, because, as Lord Mumby noted in October 10, the very existence of this sort of adversarial process only escalates and increases acrimony. And I think that is detrimental to the children's welfare. I think there's some more strategic points here as well. I think that for anyone going through this, you're not on your own. There are lots of people. And I think that a lot of energy is spent by parents who are very impassioned and motivated to obviously protect their children and themselves in cases like mine, or even much less serious. But people have to pull together in some way. There needs to be some critical mass to stop this and to stop the injustices that are going on at scale and the abuse of our children within family courts and the abuse of police. Yeah. So I urge people to come together, and through mediums such as yourself, Brian, and various other organisations to help stop this. I think for me personally, this is about my children. I'm doing this because in total sort of intent to be transparent and honest, that this has to stop. I feel harassed. I feel my liberty is at jeopardy. I cannot explain the unethical behaviours of the police in this instance. You have no control. You're very vulnerable, and you have no control in really your future liberty. A lot of people say, "Oh, just it's this hot. Walk away from your children. It'll all come to an end." No, it won't. One, I'm not abandoning my children, and they can accuse me of what they want, but I will not quit on them. And two, there is no walking away from this, because you can't, because they continually pursue you. So unless you leave the country or curl up and die, this will not stop. So for me, this is first step on getting some exposure and profile, and some protection really for my liberty.
Well, Stuart, thank you very much for saying that, because it says it all, doesn't it? They're your children, and why should you walk away from them? But also, if we don't expose these events, how do other people know exactly what's going on? While you were talking, then something that came back into my head is when we're looking at how you have seen effectively your wife change. She's become more vehement in the allegations against you. We know that in many cases, social services tell children that they are trying to take away from parents or parent. They say to the children that, of course, your mother was going to kill you and commit suicide. We've heard this in a number of cases, and those chilling words have been used to put sufficient fear into a child that they themselves then don't want to have contact with the parent. It was used with a lady who's fairly close to us in the Plymouth area, when she simply tried to protect her child against a paedophile group at a local school. and social services quickly got that child away from the mother. It was also used with a lady called Linda Lewis, who we're going to be featuring more in the coming days, in taking her daughter away at gunpoint in the States, in fact. But then why would the girl not even speak to her mother when she was old enough to do that? Because clearly there was some sort of fear going on in the child's mind. So what we do know from looking at a whole range of cases is that there are some very dark tactics which are being used by these people, and it takes it much further, if I may say this, it takes it much further than just a few social workers making a few mistakes. There's an agenda here which is malicious, and it's very powerful, and you've really alluded to that, because you say effectively once they get their teeth into you, they don't seem to want to let you go. Any ideas why would this group of people across the public sector, why would they want to continue to harass somebody like you? Have you had some thoughts as to why they would actually want to do that?
I mean, it's all subjective, isn't it? I mean, I don't know. It's probably for financial gain, unless there's some unwritten targets or, agenda going on. I mean, all I know is I've had 4 guardians. They've all disappeared, bar the last one, within days of reports being due and refusing to get involved. And that's resulted in 12 months delays. I've had guardians write reports which are factually inaccurate and blatant lies. I've had guardians who have provided false testimony and basically not considered any contact because they were trying to keep their report to 2 pages. So in the interest of the children, I want to keep my report down, but I'll just say there's no point in having any contact. I don't know why they do it. I help in a number of other cases. I'm involved with a number of other people like Steve Allen from UK Men's Aid who, they see this at scale every day. I don't know why they do it. I suspect it's for financial gain. I know in my case that my guardian and the children's solicitor have also acted as a pair in a number of other recent cases. It's the same judge and the same children's solicitor and the same guardian with the same outcomes coming out of it. It doesn't make sense. I don't know what it is. They're clearly profiting. They don't actually add any value. They can resolve cases, but they're not incentivized to do so. And therefore, one hypothesis would be, they're in it for financial gain.
Yeah. Okay, well, Stuart, thank you very much for spending the time with us and giving us such a clear account of what's happened to you. And it's really excellent to know that you are already helping other people. We think this is very important, people sticking together with teamwork. And the other thing which we are very sure about is that the profile and contact with other people has helped a number of individuals be safer. I'll use safer than they previously were. In some cases, we've actually seen the police back away completely once an isolated individual's become part of a much bigger group where people are supporting each other. So we certainly hope that you'll stay in contact with us. What I'd also like to do is pass you some more information about other cases that we know about and we've dealt with where we are building up a clearer picture of what might well be going on. So we'll do that. And all I'd say is don't be out of contact for too long, because when you're on your own, you're literally on your own. Any last points from you? Otherwise, we'll end there, I think.
No, thank you very much, Brian. I'm very grateful for your time. Really, I guess to everyone else going through it, reach out to others. There's a lot of support. There's a lot of knowledge out there. You're not on your own, and keep fighting. Don't let them win. Our children are worth so much more than this.
Well, there we are. Well, Stuart Dodd with an incredible story. Separation, not able to see his children. Harassed, bullied, threatened. This is the pitiful state of Britain today. Of course, does our government know what's going on? Without question. But we're watching utter fraud and corruption in Britain's courts to take children or prevent parents having access. And of course, they're aided by certainly a group within the police forces who are prepared to more or less stop at nothing. Well, we will continue to communicate with Stuart. We'll bring you any further updates, and we're also hoping in the next few days to get some in-depth reports about some of the other child cases, including Linda Lewis in South Wales. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye.
My children, my ex-wife, who made a number of claims, and the police threatened me. There's basically been a conscious campaign to create a narrative of false allegations to deny contact. So my wife really stopped me seeing the children day one, started the allegations day one, and I've really been sort of trying to correct the narrative since then through the family courts. Unfortunately, the family courts, working on a balance of probability as opposed to the criminal threshold of beyond reasonable doubt, have made a number of findings. They've refused me evidence, they've refused me witnesses. So I think in total I've had around 75 court hearings over the last 2 years. I've had God knows how many within the family court, probably 50 of those, 60 of those. I've still not had a single witness, any evidence. I've self-represented for almost 2 years now. All the criminal allegations my ex-wife has made, so the allegation narrative kind of stands at mental, physical, emotional, financial cruelty, domestic violence, 3 cases of harassment, harassment non-violent by telephone call, intimidation, intimidation of a witness, conspiracy to abduct, conspiracy to kidnap, conspiracy to murder, fraud, Section 5 public order offence, and a couple of others in there somewhere. Only one's made it to trial. The rest have been dismissed as no case to answer. The one that made it to trial, and it's worth noting I've been on police bail or court bail now since April, early mid-April 2013, without break. The harassment violent by telephone call made it to trial on the 7th of July last year. And was dismissed during her evidence as no case to answer. She was cautioned for the consequences of lying under oath 11 times. And, you know, there's just no evidence to any of it. It's total rubbish. And in that trial, she made claims, for example, that I threatened to kill her, kidnap her, hurt the children, etc. And all the telephone calls were recorded, and we went through those one at a time. Unfortunately, that's trial transcript, those recordings, the call recordings, all CPS evidence. Families court have refused to be allowed into the family court, amongst everything else, and made the totally polar opposite findings. So I'm in a position now where, despite all criminal charges that are currently under investigation having been dismissed, despite her lying, the family court have made those findings, and they made a no contact order on the 14th of January this year. So I'm kind of in a position where there's lots of lies going on within the family court. There seems to be no redressing it. The family courts now seem to perceive me as, you know, some sort of extreme risk of emotional harm to the children. And there's no way to correct that narrative at all. The judge concerned, so I've had 19 judges in my family case, and I requested it be reserved to one for continuity of judicial oversight. That finally ended up with the district judge, Nadeem Khan, who has essentially done nothing in my case. He's completely delayed it. He's denied me evidence. He's threatened me at every opportunity. Whenever you stand up to the court, he tends to go against you and preclude contact. He's been too afraid of implementing contact because mother's upset or mother doesn't want to support it. And on the 19th of February this year, he was arrested for treason, fraud under the 2006 Fraud Act, misconduct in a public office, and contempt of court. I'm aware through other parties, and I'm aware of one of your other guest speakers, Guy Taylor, who I've spoken with at length, who has also had dealings with Mr. Khan, and has also had him arrested on similar basis. That, you know, there's corrupt judges out there. They're either incompetent or corrupt. There's no evidence, no justification to preclude contact, and he's continued to do so. And as of this week, he's now trying to preclude my mother, so the paternal grandmother, contact with my children as well, based on the fact that as a first-hand witness to some of the allegations that she knows are false, that the family court made findings of, that, again, she fails to consider mother's emotional needs, and therefore is a risk of emotional harm to the children. So lots has gone on. I'm currently being investigated for harassment, and the police have informed me that there's a passport watch. They will arrest me on immediate return to the UK, most likely to remand me, for a charge of harassment. I haven't had any contact with my ex except through court for over 2 years, and there can be no harassment. The police have had 3 warrants out now and raided various houses, friends, and my properties. They've taken all IT, mobile phones, etc., and specifically they've taken the original copy of a void order, and I voided the orders of the family and divorce courts based on ultra vires and void ab initio, amongst a number of other things, and non-procedural compliance. And within 5 days of me actually filing that with the chief of police, with the court, with the nursery, and with the Kafkas Guardian, my houses have been raided, friends have been interviewed or questioned, another friend was arrested. Another friend of mine actually, of their own volition, knocked on my ex-wife's door to talk to her, to say, listen, come on, we're adults, why are you stopping him seeing your children? She refused to talk and simply closed the door. Fine. She was later arrested for harassment, intimidation, and conspiracy to abduct. Within that arrest, she was arrested actually in Warwickshire, and this whole matter has been based around West Mercia Police. The police officer, a PC 3202 Barradale Smith from West Mercia, drove to Warwickshire, interviewed her, made a number of false statements and allegations, and then when escorting her from the police station to her car, again attempted to intimidate, bully, and make false statements against me. The police in this matter throughout have been, they've certainly failed to investigate without fear nor favour, shall we say. They've been completely biased, discriminatory, and starting with the harassment, the first harassment allegation of non-violent by telephone call in July 13. New to being arrested, I provided evidence to the police because the telephone calls were agreed in writing between the parties' solicitors. My ex-wife denied that. I presented myself for interview voluntarily.
Good afternoon. This is Brian Gerrish with a special edition of UK Column Live, and I'm going to be joined this afternoon by an ex-Royal Marine, Stuart Dodd, who has got an incredible story to tell. He's being harassed by British police. And how did he end up in this position? Well, it started once again with a dispute in the family courts. This story is quite remarkable, with the vehemence with which the police are pursuing this man at the moment. And Stuart's ultimately come to us to get the truth out about what's happening to him. And of course, as always, aside from helping Stuart himself, we hope that by broadcasting what's happening, we can start to help other people in similar positions. So, Stuart, have we got you there? We had a good connection just now.
Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, well, welcome into UK Column Live. You are overseas. I know that you won't want to give me an exact location, but can you tell me anything about where you are? Distant, close, whatever.
Quite a long way away, so the other side of the world, basically, at the moment.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm gonna give you a free start here because you chatted to us the other day. You gave us a very concise summary. We've now decided to do it formally, as it were. So over to you. Tell us your story. Where beginning, obviously, when was life normal? When did things change?
Yeah. So really, my case started in April 2013 when my now ex-wife and I separated. Essentially, life was very normal. I had two young sons. Approximate ages now are almost 3 and almost 5. Essentially, pretty unknown, normal matrimonial situation. We separated on the 7th of April. I came home from a Commonwealth Games selection shoot to basically find my wife had gone with my children. She left a note saying, she wouldn't use them as a weapon. She wouldn't stop me seeing them. She called and texted me and invited me to meet with her to see the children and discuss future contact. And really, that's where my life sort of changed from normality to the current situation, which is pretty unexplainable. And essentially, she invited me over there. As I proceeded over, I picked up one of the children's godparents to come as an independent. And I was stopped by 3 armed response vehicles at gunpoint. It transpires, after having got hold of my freedom of information through a subject access request, the call logs from the police. Before she contacted me and invited me over, she'd called the police, used my former elite military skills and career as a risk, said that I'd threatened to kill, kidnap, harm, was psychologically unstable, etc. That really sort of transitioned from normal married life to, what is quite an extreme case within children's courts now. Since that day, and, on that day, the police realised that something didn't quite add up, but still sort of, used firearms officers to escort me to the premises to see